Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amelia Schaefer, the Executive Director of the Alzheimer's Association of Colorado. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our first virtual Reason to Hope luncheon. We miss seeing you in person, but we appreciate that you are willing to take the time to join us for this very important cause. Wherever you are, I hope you are enjoying your lunch. I won't overload you with facts. Momentarily, you'll see a brief video that succinctly lays out the challenge of this disease. But to give you a sense of the scope of the threat we're facing, you must understand that more than 50 million people around the world, including nearly 6 million in the United States and 76,000 Coloradans, are living with Alzheimer's, the only leading disease without a prevention, treatment, or cure. While the numbers are staggering, the story of Alzheimer's isn't fully captured through statistics. It is a very intimate, personal disease. If you have ever lost a loved one to dementia, you understand this better than I can explain. One of our clients, a gentleman in his mid-60s who's living with early-stage Alzheimer's, described it very well recently. He said, "Alzheimer's doesn't take your life by miles, it takes it by millimeters, a bit every day." This particular gentleman was a caregiver for both of his parents who passed away with Alzheimer's. His mother maintained her sweet disposition and sense of humor until the very end. She didn't have any other diseases or afflictions, but over time, her brain couldn't tell her body how to swallow. She essentially starved to death. His father, whom he describes as a man's man, had been a 4-year scholarship football player at the University of Notre Dame. He wasn't the kind of man to hold his son's hand, but as Alzheimer's disease diminished his sense of confidence and balance and security, he would hold his son's hand to safely cross a parking lot. Hallucinations filled his dreams and left him raging at shadows. Medications to calm him stole what was left of his spirit until he passed away. And now, this brave man, diagnosed just weeks ago, wonders what his disease holds for him. In the meantime, he's our newest volunteer, raising funds for research to find a cure. And he's determined to be the first survivor of Alzheimer's. Over the next half hour, we're going to give you a snapshot of the challenges we face with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. You'll hear some numbers and hear from some very special people who understand firsthand the impact dementia has on their loved ones and the entire family. So while you take a bite of your lunch, we'll start you off with 80 seconds of facts about Alzheimer's and dementia. Aren't those numbers scary? We recently celebrated the fact that Congress has raised the amount of money dedicated to Alzheimer's research to more than $3 billion a year. But then when you realize that in just the United States, we will spend roughly $305 billion for Alzheimer's care this year alone, it's clear that there's much work to be done. I mentioned earlier that the numbers around Alzheimer's disease are staggering, but the story of Alzheimer's is best told through people. Let's take a look at some who know this disease all too well.
I first noticed that Tammy was having memory issues when she was coming home from work and frustrated. She was a person who never was frustrated, had no clue that there was something as serious as Alzheimer's going on with her. I think the hardest part was how slow the progression and loss of Tammy was. It was just long, slow, and painful. The progression of the disease was very hard. You could just see losing Tammy as time went along. I saw other caregivers who would really be upset when their loved one no longer recognized them and didn't know who they were. That transition is difficult to take care of and to deal with emotionally. It's just a horrible progression to lose somebody that you love so much. And so your life becomes on hold. You give up a lot of your dreams, all of your retirement plans, things you're putting on hold. I never got to see Tammy know that I retired and we could have done the things that we had planned. So all of our planning and things were just gone. It's just, everything was changed. It is so important to donate money to the Alzheimer's Association, to the research, but there's an answer out there, and money would help us get the right people on it at the right time.
He gave us strength that we didn't know that we had. And this disease has brought us to our knees a time or two. But it's the strength that he has given us that gets us through. And I do have fear that when I can't find the word that I'm looking for, that I can't find my cell phone, that I can't find my keys, that maybe this is my own Alzheimer's setting in, and I'm banking on a cure. I have to have a cure for all of us down the road. This disease is too rampant, it's too pervasive, and we have got to get a cure. And as Amelia says, I will be here until there is a cure.
Well, it's been devastating. It's changed what we thought our future would be. You know, getting at this diagnosis is isolating. And then when you're like us, when you're in a kind of an isolated community to begin with, it's even worse. The support of the Alzheimer's Association has been very important to us. GLBT and straight, you know, in the community in general, there's just going to be more and more need for services for elderly, for the aging population. You know, just pour out their hearts and souls for us, and we really appreciate it. We really do. I love you too.
In Colorado, we are truly blessed to have some amazing volunteers who are willing to get involved for this cause. Some help us teach classes, some create special events, others lead support groups. All of them are committed because they have seen what Alzheimer's does to loved ones. And they are leading the way to put an end to this devastating disease.
Well, my dad was the life of the party. I just remember he loved to dance, he loved to smile, and he loved to make people happy. My dad was my hero. You know, he had all the answers, and whenever life got tough, he always knew the right thing to say to make me feel better. I remember talking to him, and we were like two ships in the night, just not connecting. And that's when I realized something is wrong. I just didn't know what it was. I remember that moment that I figured out something is wrong. I drove away and I cried because the dad that I once knew no longer existed. And that was really painful for me. It was tough. It was dark. It was depressing. No one understood. I didn't understand what was going on, and I had no help. So it was just me, and it was a very difficult time for me. After my father passed, I got involved with the Alzheimer's Association. Everyone needs to know that there is help. You don't have to go through that alone. In the African American community, we don't talk about mental health. It's something that is shameful. So that has become my platform as Mrs. Colorado American. I am passionate about it, and that is what keeps me going.
My dad was a fighter pilot and larger than life, just as you can imagine, just as you've seen them in the movies. Yes, my dad passed away in October of 2020. We started to notice something was different, honestly, at my wedding. I had several people come up to me and say, you know, your dad keeps asking me the same question over and over again. Is he okay? We just thought he was getting angrier and older. You know, with Alzheimer's disease, everyone thinks it's all about memory loss, but they don't talk a lot about paranoia and anger and sleepless nights. And this is what my mother was dealing with, but she was an amazing front, just like she'd always been her entire military wife career. My dad's disease was a slow, steady decline. So it was very hard to tell how quickly the disease was progressing, also because my mother was doing such a great job making everything seem okay. My mother, who cared for my father until the very end, and I want every caregiver out there to have the benefit of all of the wonderful programs that the association provides so that they don't have to face it alone. Had my mother had a support group or had training classes or some outlet, I think she might still be with us today. I honestly believe she died of both stress and a broken heart. I mean, she literally passed in an instant, and I think it got to her heart. I live in fear every day that it could happen to me. And I am even more worried that it could happen to my children. And so the importance of supporting the association and giving money and supporting our free programs and support groups and supporting research to end this disease is crucial, because it's going to protect future generations from potentially getting it or living with the disease.
Now you're going to hear from one of those volunteers. Theresa Valko knows this disease intimately. 8 family members on her mother's side have lived and died with Alzheimer's. And Theresa knows that she is at risk herself. She carries the same gene that brought the disease to her mother, grandmother, and many more. What would each of us do if faced with that inheritance? Theresa chooses to see it as motivation. She has served as an Alzheimer's Association board member and fundraiser in California, and now that she's living in Colorado, she is a whirlwind of activity, managing one of our walks to end Alzheimer's and so much more. I am proud to introduce one of my personal heroes, Theresa Valko.
Thank you, Amelia, for that kind introduction. And I'd like to start, too, by thanking the Colorado chapter of the Alzheimer's Association for inviting me to speak today. This is such a wonderful event, and I'm really grateful to be a part of it, so thank you. I've been a volunteer for the Alzheimer's Association for almost 10 years now. During that time, I've become very aware of our culture's focus on memory. We put a lot of emphasis on having and making memories, and it even shows up in our language every day. If you don't believe me, just watch a few commercials or listen to conversation around you. I'm sure you've heard things like, oh, we made so many great memories when someone's asked if they had a good vacation. A friend of mine had a birthday a couple of days ago, and another friend texted and said, I hope your day is memorable. We even use memory to express significance. For instance, I'm sure you've heard, wow, our wedding day was just perfect. I will always remember that day. Or maybe it's something a little different, like he realized he hit reply to all. I will never forget the look on his face. Our society puts memory or making memories as a sort of top priority for our lives, as if at the end of our life, if we have this huge catalog or this massive library of memories, that will surely be the proof of having lived a good life. But for those living with Alzheimer's and for those who will develop Alzheimer's, that just doesn't work. Short-term memory is one of the first functions of the brain affected by Alzheimer's. And then that devastation continues until almost all brain function is destroyed, certainly including both short-term and long-term memory. I lost my mom this past September. She was the 8th person our family has lost to Alzheimer's. She had already lost her only brother and her only sister to Alzheimer's, and then before that, they lost their mother and her siblings to Alzheimer's, and before that, the grandfather, someone who was described as senile in his time. And as my family now grieves the loss of my mother, the many cousins in my generation now brace for our seemingly inevitable fate. When I think about the situation that Alzheimer's creates in the context of how our world thinks of memory, I think of my own family, a family full of people who had wonderful lives, who contributed so much and to so many others so that they too could have wonderful lives. I'm just not comfortable with this notion of lasting memories being the only proof of a life well spent. Knowing all of this, thinking about all of this, has changed the way I live. I am very aware of what I know I have now and what is not guaranteed for me or anyone else later. So I put my energy into making memories. Knowing all of this, thinking about all of this, has changed the way I live. I'm very aware of what I know I have now and what is not guaranteed for me or anyone else later. I no longer put my energy into making memories, and instead, I live for moments. Each day of my life, I'm keenly aware of the gift of moments. I look for them, I create them, I recognize them, and then I truly savor them. Moments. I want to take you back in time for a minute to the beginning of my personal Alzheimer's story, back to my freshman year of college. During that spring, my grandmother, my mom's mother, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. By the time the summer came, my Uncle Ralph had moved grandmother in with his family, and my uncle also invited me to live with his family so that I could work for him during my summer break. A special routine sprang up that summer that made a significant impression on me. Most evenings we would sit together, my aunt, uncle, cousin, grandmother, and me, and enjoy a home-cooked meal. Now, my uncle did travel on occasion for both business and pleasure. My grandmother, of course, knew this. So very often during those dinners, she would turn to her son and ask him if he had been traveling recently. Initially, this question would be answered frankly, with a no, not lately, or yeah, I went to Atlanta for a meeting a couple of days ago. But as I said, my grandmother was in early stage Alzheimer's that summer. And as many of you are aware, in that stage, it's common for the same question to be repeated, not remembering that it had already been asked. It's also common for the person living with Alzheimer's to not remember the answers that were given to that repeated question. Inevitably, she would ask him again about his travels. Now, on the subsequent inquiries, the answer would become something very different. He might say, yeah, I traveled to Colorado and I hiked to the top of Pikes Peak. Or I flew out to California and I learned how to surf in Santa Barbara. It was always some unexpected tale of adventure. Each time she asked, the answer would change. And this would continue throughout that dinner and every dinner. We heard about trips to everywhere from Albuquerque to Austria, from Miami to Morocco. And let me tell you, everyone, especially my grandmother, was highly entertained. Now, sometimes when I tell that story, folks say, but he was lying, and that's bad, right? But I say, that special man took a situation that could have been awkward, maybe depressing, certainly repetitive, and he turned it into something kind of wonderful. All my grandmother wanted was to engage with us. She wanted to let us know that she loved us by asking us about our lives, my uncles in this instance. All we wanted for her was for her to feel happy and safe and loved in return. By using a little creativity, my uncle made all of that happen. And he did it night after night, dinner after dinner, moment after moment. That was a long time ago. Since then, our family has watched loved one after loved one after loved one, including my Uncle Ralph, succumb to Alzheimer's. My mother spent her last years in memory care. Her very last year, she was unable to move around without assistance, unable to perform her own hygiene or dress herself, and she was unable to speak. Because she was in my hometown in Georgia, I would have to travel there in order to spend time with her. I would go there and I'd find someone who was only a fragment of the person I knew as my mother. Alzheimer's disease had ripped away and stolen almost everything about her that made her who she was. I would go to her, I would sit with her and put her hands in mine, hands so familiar to me, and I would feel their soft tenderness. And it was still that same soft tenderness that I felt on my forehead each time I had a fever as a child. It was still that same soft tenderness I felt each time we took our hundreds of walks together, always hand in hand, regardless of our ages. And then I would lean into her and I would hold her. I'd feel her soft breath on my neck, and I would feel the warmth coming from her. And that warmth, it was still that same warmth that I felt as a child each time I brought home some new certificate from school and she would give me a hug. Or on every day I think we ever spent together when we would pause what we were doing, hug each other, and exchange I love yous. And then I would look into her dark brown eyes, and there was a part of me that still expected to see all the love that a mother has for their child looking back at me. But that's not what I would see. Instead, I would see disconnection, confusion. So I'd pull her close to me and I'd line my gaze up with hers and I would say, "Hi, Mom, it's Theresa." And it would happen. There would be this small spark in her eye and the corners of her mouth would turn up. She knew. And I knew she knew. And that space between us would fill with love, and it was so beautiful. And then almost as quickly as she came to me, she would be gone again. It was a moment. It was a moment that would only ever exist in that very instant. It was a moment that would never become a memory for her to think back on that night or the next day or the next week when I was home. It was a moment. And that's all my mother had for so much of her Alzheimer's journey. Just moments. My mom's moments are over now. And even though she's gone, my connection to Alzheimer's remains. I'm not content with my connection to Alzheimer's, a connection full of tremendous sadness and loss. So now I use my moments to fight. I fight the very disease that has taken so much from me and my family. I go out into the world and I teach to raise concern about Alzheimer's and other dementia. I speak to raise awareness about the good work of the Alzheimer's Association. I talk with elected officials on the federal, state, and local levels about supporting the Alzheimer's community. I have a team each year in the Walk to End Alzheimer's, and I recruit teams across the country to use their passions on the longest day. And together, with my supportive husband, we give. We give to the Alzheimer's Association because we share their vision of a world without Alzheimer's and other dementia. And because we want our two daughters to live big, beautiful lives without the fear of getting Alzheimer's. I want to change my personal connection to Alzheimer's from being a connection of tragedy and loss into something very different. I fight so that I can forge a new kind of connection to Alzheimer's. And my next connection will be a personal connection to the end of Alzheimer's. So I ask all of you, what is your personal connection to Alzheimer's and dementia? And what do you want your connection to be? This is a moment, right here, right now. This is your moment to fight. Take this moment, this opportunity to forge your next connection to Alzheimer's. I humbly ask you to use this moment, make it your moment, join me in the fight, and together, let's bring an end to Alzheimer's and other dementia. And I know we can do it, one fighting moment at a time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Theresa. Now you know why I admire this woman so much. So where do we go from here? I hope we take Theresa up on her challenge. Each and every one of us can make a difference. We can shorten the time between today and the day we find the first survivor of Alzheimer's. You can make your donation to support the Alzheimer's Association by clicking the link right on your screen. You can also find it on our website. If you prefer, you can mail in a donation. You can send it to our office at 455 North Sherman Street, Suite 500, Denver, Colorado, 80203. The address is also on our website, alz.org/CO. But before I let you go, let me give you a bit of information about the Alzheimer's Association. We are essentially self-funded. We are able to provide information, programs, and services to all families at no charge because of the generosity of people just like you. And your donations also help fund the research that the association supports around the world. In fact, in the last 2 years, the Alzheimer's Association of Colorado committed an additional $2 million to 10 research projects in 6 countries. We don't care where the cure comes from, so we scour the globe for the brightest minds to help us solve this medical riddle. As you might expect, the coronavirus pandemic has been hard on organizations like ours. Out of concern for the safety of your families and our staff and volunteers, we've moved all of our education and support programs to the internet and telephone. The same goes for our fundraising programs, like this one. But unlike many voluntary health organizations that have closed offices and cut their staff back, the Alzheimer's Association is still here. We remain committed to helping every one of the 76,000 Coloradans living with Alzheimer's disease and the 256,000 family members who are their unpaid caregivers. Please help us by clicking on the link now and making your donation. Your financial support is essential. We need it to offer educational webinars over Zoom. We need it to staff our 24-hour, 7-day-a-week helpline and provide guidance to families that have caregiving crises at all hours of the day and night. And we need it to fund research to find a cure and find that first survivor of Alzheimer's. Please click on the link and make your donation now. Let's ensure that Theresa Valko and her daughters do not continue to carry this Alzheimer's legacy. Let's make sure that your family does not find itself facing this horrid disease. Or, if you already know the devastation of Alzheimer's, let's put a stop to it. On behalf of the Alzheimer's Association of Colorado, I thank you for joining us today and for your generous donation, which gives all of us so many reasons to hope.